So this is session one on governance. We are going to hear the output from the Charter Working Group that I alluded to earlier, as well as some very relevant policy agenda items related to data sharing, publications, and industry engagement. And then after a break, we'll be having a discussion very relevant to to what we just talked about with how do we mobilize the IACC cohorts to address issues around the COVID-19 pandemic. You see on the right-hand side of this slide the various speakers in this session. We'll introduce them briefly, but I also want to point out we are proud of the fact that there are 15 X chromosomes and only one Y chromosome on this list. We really are proud of the diversity of our speakers and participants in today's in this summit. So with that, let's I guess move. Is there another slide? Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Da Silva, who is Head of Population Health at the Wellcome Trust, and she will be talking about progress on developing the IACC Charter. Mary?
Good morning, everybody. Great. So I'm Mary Da Silva, Head of Population Health at the Wellcome Trust. And as Jeff said, I chair the development of this charter, which we agreed after the annual meeting in Iceland last year would be a great thing for the organisation to have. I worked really closely with John Connolly, who provided the secretariat for this work, and a group of cohort members from IHTC. So I want to thank everybody for that. Next slide. So to start off, sorry, go back one. That's it. Thank you. So first of all, to say that the Charter is not a legally binding document. Instead, it outlines the requirements and the expectations by which members of IHCC agree to collaborate. It also outlines governance structure to ensure that the organisation is collaborative and democratic with a cohesive and functional structure. And it also links to the policies that we want membership to abide by. So it is a memorandum of understanding to sign about how you will cooperate and act within this collaborative arrangement. The language of the Charter is not 100% final. We can do some wordsmithing, but we are in very final stages of developing it now. So this presentation will describe briefly the process we went through to develop the Charter and outline the core principles that the Charter abides by, and then the content. And we're going to end with a poll to see whether, in principle, cohort members would be willing to ratify the Charter. Next slide, please. Next slide. Great. So this is a brief outline of the process we went through. We asked all members to volunteer to join the Charter Development Group, and we had a huge response, which we're very grateful for. We then carefully chose a group of 8 or 9 people who represent the diversity of the cohorts within IHCC, both geographically and also by the type of science that the cohort predominantly does. We had a first meeting in October last year where we outlined the principles and agreed the content, the kind of broad scope of it. And then John and I iterated some charter drafts, which were then commented on and refined by the development group. Then went to the steering group and the policy group and the executive committee for more comments. And then that was revised and sent to all membership a couple of weeks ago. And we have incorporated the comments that we got from that final round in the draft that you see now, which is in the app for this conference and also on the homepage of the HCC website. So hopefully you've all had a chance to look at it. So we hope in May we will be able to ratify the Charter. Next slide. So this is the Charter Group, and as you can see, we have representation from every single continent in the globe, and also from biomedical, genomic, social science cohorts. So the whole diversity of the IHCC membership we try to represent by these people, and I hugely thank them for their efforts to developing the Charter. Next slide. So the two principles which the Charter abides by are transparency and fairness. Transparency in process, practice and outcomes in all of the projects and policies that IHCC has. And that means democratic decision-making processes and also open and timely access to all the research outputs which are generated through IHCC activity. The second principle is fairness, inclusivity and equity for all the members, and that's across all the different domains of diversity within IHCC. So different geographies, different types of data types within cohorts, so including, for example, those not enriched genomics. Diversity of age span, so right from preconception all the way through to old age. And also diversity in the type of science. Social science, biomedicine and epidemiology, for example, are all equally privileged. Next slide. Great. So a little bit of more detail about the content of the Charter. And as I said, it's really outlining requirements and expectations by which IHCC members agree to collaborate. It's not a legally binding document. Next. So hopefully you're very familiar with the vision of IHCC as a global network of large cohorts with multidimensional data from diverse populations. And the key is really to maximally utilise these resources to enhance our scientific understanding of a range of causes of disease, but also research to ultimately improve population health. Next slide. So the governance structure is amended from the current government structure, and this is to reflect this move that this is a very democratic and collaborative organisation. Next slide. So I'll go through each of the committees in turn. So the executive committee is comprised of our 3 co-chairs, and they have 5-year renewal terms, and their term is voted for by the scientific steering committee. It also has 4 executive members who are nominated by the membership and again voted for by the steering committee. And each of those members serves a 3-year term with rotation of terms so that the whole executive committee doesn't rotate off in one go. Next. The scientific committee has 15 voting members, and this comprises a chair and cohort members who are nominated and elected by the membership. And it also includes chairs of the different work groups and also the scientific project subcommittee. So the people who are kind of leading the day-to-day work of IHCC. Those people have 3-year terms, and again, they're rotated. And the executive members can attend and observe the scientific steering committee, but they don't have voting rights because they are obviously taking advice and scientific steer from the scientific committee rather than being members of it. And then the executive committee make final voting decisions themselves as well. Next. So the Scientific Projects Subcommittee is a committee which reviews and approves scientific projects from any IHCC member and groups of members. It is again made up of the membership of IHCC, and projects submit a standardised protocol form, and they are approved by consensus within the committee. And they can, once approved, these projects can have access to IHCC managed data. In some cases, there might be some pilot funding. For example, Wellcome has just provided money for some pilot projects. So it might be access to those funds are through this scientific projects subcommittee. Next. And then we have currently 3 different work groups which lead specific areas of IHCC strategy, policy and delivery. They are comprised of IHCC members who have the relevant expertise for the task at hand. And I won't talk about those groups in detail because you'll be hearing from each of those groups throughout the course of the site. Next. So the governance functions, I'm going to focus on the Executive Committee and the Scientific Steering Committee to show the difference between the two. So the Executive Committee is really the body that manages and is accountable for delivering the strategy of IHCC. So they acquire funding for the initiative. They're responsible both to the membership and to funders to deliver the strategic objectives of IHCC, and that includes direct administrative and financial management. They do provide assignments to the work group to ensure the organisation is doing the tasks it needs to do. And they also resolve any disputes which may arise in the course of between members or in the course of activities. The Scientific Steering Committee, on the other hand, is more of a scientific steering body. So they will provide guidance to the Executive Committee on the long-term strategic direction of the organisation and approve the programme goals which the Executive Committee sets out. Very importantly, they also approve new membership of IHCC by majority vote. And they also vote on the membership of the Executive Committee. And they review and provide formal acceptance of IHCC by policies, protocols and procedures. So they really act as a steering body for the Executive Committee. Next. So I'll talk briefly about the different membership types. There are 3 types of members, only one of which has a democratic vote, with one cohort having 1 vote. And if there is a consortium membership, a consortium of cohorts which are smaller than 100,000, then each consortium also has 1 vote. So to be a member, a cohort can be from a country and must have more than 100,000 participants already enrolled. For cohorts of disadvantaged populations or underrepresented populations, such as those in low and middle income countries or disadvantaged populations in high income countries, then the Scientific Steering Committee can award that cohort full membership on a case-by-case basis, really valuing the need for data from those populations. All cohorts must have longitudinal follow-up for health outcomes. They must not be selected based on a specific disease or an existing condition, and they must have participants who have contributed biological samples, or they have protocols approved and in place in order to do so if they are continuing to collect data. And lastly, all the cohorts must be willing and able, in terms of their consents and local laws, to share their data or their metadata with other IHCC members. Next slide. So the other 2 types of members don't have voting rights. So affiliate members are either specific individuals with scientific expertise or specific expertise which is very valuable to IHCC, for example in genomics or in data sharing, but they don't themselves bring any data to IHCC. The aim is that the full membership with voting rights are those people who are contributing data to the collaboration. Cohorts who plan to enrol 100,000 people but who are still in the process of enrolling that number are also affiliate members and will transition to full membership when they hit their enrolment target 100,000. And also cohorts who are very large, so more than 100,000, but who don't have biological data or who do not intend to collect biological data, they can also be affiliate members, and they can, for example, take part in cross-cohort analyses on the social and environmental determinants of disease. Industry members are very important. IHCC has a stated aim of strengthening links between academic and industry and commercial sectors, where this collaboration is consistent with the vision of IHCC. If an industry partner does have a cohort which meets the criteria for full membership, then they are eligible for cohort membership, again to be voted on by the Scientific Steering Committee. If they don't bring data, then again they don't have voting rights. And all industry members have to agree to abide by the IHCC collaboration with industry guidelines, which I believe we'll be talking more about tomorrow. Next. So this is the last slide, really, and I'm not going to talk through these policies because other people will talk to them today and tomorrow. But these are the 3 policies which are currently linked to the Charter. And if you sign the Charter, then you also agree to abide by these policies. Core data sharing principles, the publication policy and guidelines of the collaboration with industry. Great, so now it's time if anyone has any questions or discussion around the Charter, and then we'll end up with a poll of the people on this call to see whether in principle you would be happy to ratify the Charter as it stands.
Hi, Mary, this is Jeff. Thank you for leading the charge on, and you and John for making the Charter possible. Your work was fantastic on this. I would like to first just ask a quick question about working groups. I'm anticipating that a number of novel working groups might spin out of the next 2 days of meetings, and also worry about a massive working group proliferation that taxes the resources that we have. So I'm just wondering if there should be some formalized process to propose a working group, and its mission, charter, and maybe how it sunsets, so that it doesn't continue on and on while other ones are being spun up.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And it might be that work groups fall under certain categories. So, for example, you might have a proliferation of scientific working groups, for example, one on COVID and another on genomics, that you might then fall under the umbrella of the scientific strategy. I can't remember the exact name of the working group on scientific strategy, but you might have working groups falling under the umbrella of a larger working group, which is then representative of the scientific steering committee. Because if you have 20 working groups, you can't have 20 chairs on the scientific steering committee, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're seeing the chat, Mary, but there's a question from David Glazer. Are you able to see that, or do you want me to read it to you?
Yes, I can see it. Yeah, so the data sharing, you're quite right, David, is a really thorny issue. That's why we included sharing metadata as well as individual level data, because we didn't want to set the bar too high in terms of data sharing. I'm going to dodge the question in that I didn't write the data sharing policy, so I would suggest that Laura or somebody else from the data sharing group address this question, because I'm really not, the expert on that. Sorry for dodging the question.
And this is Laura, and I'll just jump in for now to defer it until we talk about the data sharing principles, because you'll see that very issue and the tension that we have to work through is very much a part of how we've structured the data sharing conversation for now and the direction that we will need to go going forward.
Thanks, Laura. I'll stay tuned.
And I think a similar question from from Rajesh, that it is going to be very individually cohort specific. And again, let's defer all discussions of data sharing to that section of the summit. And Thomas, excellent point about drafting the 5-year plan first and then aligning how the proposed working groups contribute to those goals is a really excellent suggestion. Thank you. I think in terms of seeing questions from others, people have to post it to all panelists and participants in order to see them in the whole chat.
Hi, Mary. I guess I was just thinking that while we're having working groups, we really need that. But rather than having just a proliferation of lots of different in a kind of uncontrolled way, we really want to set out, what are the key mission and goals for IHCC, and to write that out and then slot in how the working groups contribute to those goals, so that we kind of keep it on, fairly much on mission, I guess, for IHCC.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And that's certainly what's happened to date, in that the 3 working groups represent the 3 key areas that IHCC needed to move forward on. Yeah.
Right. This is Jeff. I would say that the COVID-19 situation and if we're nimble, we might spin up working groups that are a little different than what was originally anticipated. But to your point, Thomas, I think our 5-year plan should really dictate what are the major work streams, and we should have a process that will actually keep us in check, so that we don't have a massive proliferation of working groups that we cannot handle and will lead to diminishing returns.
Yeah. I think the other thing to say is that there's a difference between a working group, which is specifically addressing a strategic area of importance for the mission of IHCC, versus scientific teams, which are analysing cross-cohort data to answer a scientific question. And there can obviously be proliferation of groups, of scientific groups answering scientific questions, and that's not the same as a working group. Okay. And Rajesh, as I say, I'm not involved in data sharing, so again, let's leave that question on whether there's a set of minimal variables which cohorts would be required to submit. I think that would be a very good thing to have the minimum metadata required for membership laid out. And again, I'll defer that to the data sharing group. Great.
Maybe another question for me or a comment is, first of all, most of you that were in Reykjavik will recall that this charter was really the result of a very passionate discussion at the close of that meeting, really wanting to have the cohort membership really drive what the IACC does and how it does it. So I think we've achieved that goal, and I continue to encourage all of our members, both those that are attending this virtual summit as well as others that cannot for whatever reason, to continue to make contributions. And Mary, you might want to comment on the notion of a charter being a living document of some type, and how that will unfold.
Yes, absolutely. So the charter will link to, it's specifically designed so that the individual policies are linked to rather than embedded in the charter. So as policies evolve or new policies are created, then that can be linked into the charter. The steering group have the ability to revise the charter and to agree amendments, and major amendments to the charter will go back to the full membership for ratification. So it's certainly envisaged as an ongoing living document. I think the other thing I'd like to say is that we welcome, as Jeff said, recently approved funding for IHCC for the coming year in partnership with NIH. And I'd perhaps like to reflect the discussion that we had internally about whether we would fund this or not. And there was a really high level of positivity from Wellcome staff about the work that IHCC is doing, about how far you've come as an organisation in quite a short amount of time, and the level of ambition that you have. So I think it's we're really, as a funder now, we're very excited to see how you move forward. And I feel that the charter, as it's constructed, gives it a sound kind of collaborative footing, which is hopefully adaptable and kind of will move as this research evolves. So yeah, I'm excited about the work you're doing, and thank you for that.
Mary, it's Peter. Just back to the comment at the beginning about it being a guide, inspiring document rather than a legal document. I'm assuming in some of those scientific projects, if a tighter degree of collaboration and cooperation is from the participants in a specific project, they can form that. And as long as they're operating within the spirit of the charter of IHCC, so some of these more complex questions about specific data sharing and consent could be addressed by the participants in a scientific project that we don't have to put in the entire charter.
Absolutely. And the project proposal form, the charter lists a number of domains which the project proposal form will include, that people who want to do IHCC projects have to complete. And that includes information about how data will be shared across cohorts and all of that detailed stuff that you just talked about, Peter. So absolutely, they're details for specific scientific collaborations rather than the setup of the organisation as a whole. Great. So maybe it's time to move on to the poll to see whether people are in principle happy to ratify the charter. So I'm going to hand over to whoever is clever at this. Oh, there we go. So hopefully on your screen a poll has popped up. And obviously if you're not a cohort member, so myself, I'm going to tick I'm not associated with the cohort rather than voting yes or no, because I wouldn't be a full member. I'll be an affiliate member, I hope. Great, and then we're going to risk it and hopefully share the results of the poll as they come up. And obviously, if people aren't happy to ratify the charter as it stands, then we would ask those people to get in touch with us to say the problems with the charter, and then we can obviously address those and take a revised charter back to the membership. I don't know if we're able to show the results of the poll.
Jeff, I'm just curious as to whether everybody's seen the poll, because I am not.
Yeah, it popped up on my screen.
So the poll did pop up, and now we're seeing the polling results.
Okay.
Good. I can't see the polling results.
There's some people in the chat not seeing the poll, and some are, apparently.
Okay. Let's see. Is it on the share screen, the results of the poll?
Have you finished?
Not yet. So you might have to click polling at the bottom of your screen for it to pop up if you aren't seeing it.
Okay. This is a very new experience for me.
Yes, this is a new experience for all of us.
Yes, and we will show the results, but as of right now, we only have about 60% of attendees have voted, so we were just going to wait to give them a little more time. That's fine.
And maybe, Hannah, you could repeat where you find the polling option.
Yes, so usually it's at the bottom of a screen. There's the Zoom bar, and it should say, there's a participants button, a Q&A, a polling, so if you click the polling button, that should pop up for you.
I can't see that on my screen, I have to say.
Actually, mine, it appeared completely off the Zoom screen in a different location on my desktop, so it's not in the Zoom screen.
Yeah, I'm not sure if being full screen versus minimized view makes a difference. Mine popped up in front of mine, but
yeah,
I'm sure it's a little finicky.
It may depend on whether you've got installed a full recent version of Zoom. That might influence it.
Yes.
It's true. And it may also depend on your bandwidth.
So what percentage of attendees have responded now?
We have 68%.
Okay. Well, maybe we can, because I don't want this to delay proceedings. So maybe you can let us know the results, Hannah, and then we could perhaps do a Slido or a something else offline that people could respond via email. I mean, really, the point of this poll is to understand if people are generally happy, and if they're not happy, to let us know why, so that we can fix the problem.
Yeah, so I think, Ida, you can share the results, but I can say out loud that half of the attendees said yes, and half said they are not associated with a cohort. So we have not yet gotten a no.
That's great.
So good news.
Good. Excellent.
And I think we should be able to see poll results.
Yeah, I can see that on the front of my screen. I see it too. Great. And yes, it is, Alex. It's 1 vote per cohort for ratifying the charter. I would say if you're an attendee on the call who isn't associated with the cohort, then you can say yes or no. If you're someone like me that doesn't have a cohort, then I say I'm not associated with a cohort. Yeah. Great. But as I say, this is just this isn't the full ratification. This is just to get a sense from the community of whether you're broadly happy. Since we've had no no's, I'm feeling positive that that works. John Connolly has created a link where you'll be asked to ratify the charter, and that also has a box where you can say if you're not happy, why you're not happy. And so that's probably the next stage, is to send that round, and then we can gather more detailed comments. But certainly from the comments we've had from the membership, when we sent the charter around a few weeks ago, there were no major concerns expressed by any of the membership about the charter. So I'm hopeful that we are nearly there.
And I just want to make one comment. So a few people were asking, or just saying, to keep in mind that we do have a few cohorts with multiple participants on the call, and we will be able to go in after the meeting and see who did vote. So we will be able to discount if there are multiple votes per cohort. And then also all the chats will be saved and everything. So we'll have all this information going forward.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Mary. And let me just reiterate, first of all, thanks to Mary, John, and the entire charter development team for the effort you all put in over the last 6 months or so to arrive at this very good conclusion. As you said several times, the voting here was not a formal vote, but mainly a directional vote that we will undertake a more formal ratification outside of this virtual summit to ensure that we record even those cohorts that are members that are unable to participate today. So terrific. And as everybody said, as others said, we are learning on the fly how to deal with some of the technical issues here. So I appreciate your flexibility and forgiveness of some minor glitches along the way. Thanks again, Mary. And now we're going to move into some topics that have already been alluded to that are integrally linked to the charter and that have been spearheaded by our policy working group, Laura Rodriguez, is going to be formerly of the National Human Genome Research Institute and also formerly of Geisinger Health, is going to be leading the discussion on publications, data sharing, and industry partnerships. Laura?
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And we're going to walk through 3 documents. And if I can get the next slide, the first one. I'm just going to walk through very quickly an overview of the purpose and content for each of the documents, and then highlight some of the key questions that we asked when we sent these documents out with the charter about 2 weeks ago. We thought these were the important decision points, some issues that came back to us through early feedback through the steering committee and some others. We can spend time on them. If they're not deep questions for the full group, we can move on and make sure that there's time for open floor discussion. And we're going to do that, as I'll talk about after each document rather than at the very end. So if I can have the next slide, please. I wanted to do a quick poll, and we'll just see how this worked. In part because we were getting long into the session, and in part because I was curious just to make sure I address things as well as I can to know who had had a chance to take a look at these documents beforehand. It's not binding. No one's going to hold it against you one way or the other. We all did miss the plane flight, which at least for me is where I do all of my pre-meeting reading. And so it's just something to give us a little bit of a clue, and we won't spend too much time on it since we had some of the technical issues before. Okay, that's great, and about what I expected. Actually a little better than I expected, knowing how busy everyone is. So I'm glad that a good proportion had a chance to skim it or to at least start. So again, next slide. If we move into, again, thinking about how did we get to where we are with presenting these ideas to you all today. Much of it has come from the discussion that we've had the past 3 years at these summits, and in particular during the breakout sessions for the policy discussions. But most fundamentally, it really draws from the draft charter in terms of the vision and the values that the charter puts forward for the IHCC, as well as filling out some of the processes that are needed to operationalize the activities for IHCC. And of course, then a good amount of the shape that comes with each of these discussions and the views on the issues comes from the policy and biodata sharing working group members themselves. So if we can move to the next slide, I've just listed them up here for you as a way to make sure that I was able to thank them all for contributing, and also so you could see the range of representation that we had. It's also an opportunity to invite anyone who is interested in joining these discussions going forward. To do so, we've added a couple of members recently and are always happy to take more. So please contact either myself or Jessica Rush, who I also want to call out here, who has been very helpful with coordinating our activities as well as providing thoughtful feedback and developing some of the policies as well. Next slide. So again, I just want to set expectations for where we are in terms of all of the policies. We're at the beginning of the beginning in terms of crafting the framework through which IHCC will one day operate, really focused on standing up the activities necessary for our collaborative projects to begin to go forward. So this is why we are focused on what is the publication policy to flow through and make sure we are disseminating the output of the work that we're doing, as well as how are we going to engage with industry partners, and again, really beginning to get to the data sharing issues, which of course are at the heart of what we're going to be trying to do by working together. Next slide. Just a quick review for what we want to accomplish today. My first and foremost goal is to actually get through the discussion of all 3 documents, at least in some form. To do that, I am going to mine the time relatively tightly and hope that we can focus some of the discussions on places where we need to clarify or ask questions about the rationale for certain things, provide feedback on some of these points of tension or decision points, and identify places where we need to do some more work. Finer details and wordsmithing are happily accepted, but please let's do that by email to the extent that we can, because there's going to be time for this, because as the graphic indicates, we are not approving these today. This is really a chance to check in and collect feedback, and per the charter, policies will go back to the Scientific Steering Committee to be approved on behalf of the membership. And when we look at each policy, we'll actually, in the polling that we'll do then, we'll give you a couple of different options for where we are in terms of readiness for any of these documents to go forward to that stage. Okay, so with that, we're going to dig into the publication policy first. Next slide. Here, the purpose of what this policy does is pretty straightforward. I think we all understand it, and it's really to, again, carry through some of the expression of the values that are pointed to in the charter. I broke them into 3 versus the 2 that Mary presented, mostly because I pulled out also open and timely dissemination of research findings, as well as the transparency and the fairness and equity, or expressed here as inclusivity of all the cohorts within IHCC activities. And to do this in order to support the timely and again, open dissemination of IHCC research in a way that enables all IHCC members to participate in authoring the publications. Another point just to note at the outset, this is crafted. You can do policy through several different types of documents or policy tools. This is done as a formal policy with expectations that, as Mary indicated, based on the charter, all IHC members, whether full cohort member, affiliate member, or industry member, would be expected to follow, so that there's consistency in expectations and accountability going forward. Next slide. So what is included within this document? It talks about, first and foremost, the types of publications we anticipate coming out of IHCC activities, what the authorship is expected to be for those different types of publications, as well as acknowledgement of both the cohorts who participate in any IHCC project, as well as the IHCC itself. And we'll talk a little bit more about those different types of publications over the next slides. Reinforces that publication should happen in a timely way and be done through open access formats as laid out within the charter, provides some specifications around the expectations and responsibilities for writing groups, guidance around authorship and acknowledgement statements to be included within manuscripts, and then also, again, in terms of filling out a process that is called for within the charter. I can't remember if Mary mentioned it explicitly or not, but one of the elements to be reviewed by the Scientific Project Subcommittee for any IHCC project proposed is a publication and authorship plan. And so this policy is where that plan is fleshed out, and there's actually a template provided for members to use when they submit their package of information to the Scientific Project Subcommittee. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to begin some discussion here in a moment, so you can get ready to think about whether or not you're going to raise your hand or just pose a question. And both of the first advanced questions and topics to discuss that came up from the feedback through the steering committee had to do with distinctions among the 3 different types of IHCC publications: the consortium papers, the IHCC project papers, and individual papers. And we'll talk first about the consortium paper. Based on the charter, consortium papers would be managed and developed by the Scientific Steering Committee. Every IHCC member would have an opportunity to be listed as an author and to contribute to the manuscript, and they would tend to talk about IHCC policies or views or overarching procedures for how the IHCC comes together as a consortium. In the process of vetting this policy through the steering committee, a question was raised about whether or not there would be other scenarios which might qualify for being a consortium paper, again, with every member being listed as an author, et cetera, raising it to that highest level of a consortium-wide effort. We could imagine scenarios for different scientific projects. There might be other position statements or things that we might want to do. And so here the question for discussion is, should specific criteria be defined in terms of deciding what might be a consortium level paper outside of those situations where we're talking about a policy or a particular procedure around the consortium. Would this be something that might be determined in terms of the number of IHC members that participate or the percentage of IHCC members participating that might bump it up from an IHCC project paper to a consortium paper? Are there other scenario or other criteria that should be considered? We can move forward to the next slide, please, which is a similar question, but has to do with distinguishing between an IHCC project paper, which is driven by the team that assembles a proposal that goes through the scientific project subcommittee. There's a writing group established, et cetera. And authors on that paper are expected to be those who are substantially contributing to that individual project, with acknowledgement of the cohorts that participate, even if they're not participating in the writing effort but may contribute data, and also acknowledgement of the IHCC in some fashion, versus an individual paper, which could result from an IHCC member or a few members that come together to pursue a collaborative project, but outside the scope of the IHCC. So they would not be expected to submit an IHCC project proposal. And so really this question, while it's coming up in the context of the policy discussion, it's really about what merits coming together to be branded as an IHCC project, and again, then go through the process defined within the charter for review and specific approval to go forward. And so again, asking a similar type of question about how do we determine the difference between these two? Is it a number issue, a percentage of members involved? Is it about the resources in terms of IHCC resources, the data atlas, et cetera, that are involved? So again, opening this up to questions, if anyone has them, or to raise your hand.
Laura, in the chat, Usha Menon has stated that we need to clarify if consortium papers, whether cohorts will be named or individuals from cohorts. How is that being addressed? How we actually give credit to consortium members or individuals in the way that these papers are published?
So when we talked about this within the policy group, we thought there'd be some amount of variability based on how the journal that a paper was going to would allow us to recognize it. We know some have different policies. We also thought that this would be something that the scientific steering committee would develop some proposed acknowledgement statements, either by cohort or with individual members, that could be provided out for feedback to the cohorts to make sure we have referenced and cited the right people or the cohort in the way that it should be, to have those acknowledgement statements ready based on then what journal a submission might go to, so that everyone had pre-approved it and it wasn't something that was being put together on the fly.
So maybe one thing we can do offline is develop an appendix that lists the appropriate individuals representing the cohort, so that they can be potentially indexed in PubMed or other types of databases, which are often quite important for individuals' recognition.
Exactly, and I think we were hoping that for consortium papers, we would in most cases be able to reference individuals so that they could be cited. Another thing that is mentioned within the policy in terms of the discussion about the acknowledgement statements is that we would, again, prepare those in advance and make sure that for every cohort, this information was available through the IHCC website to any writing group that was putting something together. So it was, again, ready in advance, signed off by the PI for a cohort or the appropriate person to make sure it was correct.
There's also a comment from Carolina Hayfliger about the need for some organizations to have an internal review process. And so there should be, I guess, allotted time and for that to take place, so that for organizations that do require internal review.
Right, and we'd love to get feedback on this from people through emails again or putting it in chat. What we've suggested is that participants in the writing group be provided at least 3 weeks for any review and contribution, as well as any internal review from organizations that would need to be sought in order to provide feedback on the paper. And then again, similar timelines for comments that come back from the review process, et cetera.
And Hobus Herbst has made a comment on your question about individual versus project papers, thinking about distinguishing feature being for an IACC paper being something that uses the IACC resources or infrastructure.
So that is, in fact, along the lines of what the policy group was thinking, but we just wanted to make sure that that fit with the full group's perspective. And again, you know, if it's 10 cohort members that come together, does that make a difference if they're only using minor, you know, relatively minor may not be the right word, resources through the IACC versus something, again, as I think someone else put up in the chat, where they're really coming together around the consortium and the goals of the consortium and fully utilizing IACC resources and therefore submitting a full-blown project proposal for review and branding as an IACC project. Okay, so in the interest of time, please, again, if you have other thoughts on this or questions, email me or provide information in the chat. But let's move on to the next slide. Just quickly want to go back and talk about some of the information that is proposed to be included within the publication and authorship plan. Please go back and take a look at this in the document itself. There's discussion within the policy about these elements to include, as well as how they're laid out in the template for this plan itself. Again, reiterating that the plan is indeed expected to come in with the scientific project proposal, and so this would be before any work commenced. And so, of course, we understand that the information requested, such as how many papers or what topic the papers will be about, or exactly who will be involved and what journals it might be submitted to, is likely to change. So we're asking for the most informed expectation that the group has at the time in terms of number of papers, potential topics, again, anticipated journals, but it can change. We're also hoping that we can design the form in a way that just one form needs to be submitted, even if you're expecting that there might be, 3 to 5 publications that come out of it, so this isn't burdensome and doesn't get weighed down in the paperwork. Next slide. One question that came back from the group when this was sent out to the membership was review, was asking about or noting the potential opportunity to highlight the IHCC role in promoting and supporting junior investigators and involvement in these publications. And so I just wanted to highlight that for the group. I personally agree with it, but would really like to, hear what others think. If there are any concerns, I think it's something we could provide to within the discussion about writing groups and things to think about with regard to putting together writing groups, as well as in how authorship is assigned in the process. Next slide. So I just want to here's a chance to just open the floor for anything else, any questions people have. What did you not hear within this policy that you really wanted to hear, think needs to be included, etc. Okay, so then we'll move to the next slide, which is another polling slide. And this is the chance for you all to let us know where, again, in the readiness arena you all think we are. Is this something that needs a major rework and you all want to see it again before it moves forward? Are there areas where you think something needs to be changed or modified and you would like to see those changes with just a high-level review, not necessarily opening up the entire policy again? Or do you think it's in reasonable shape and with some minor edits based on feedback that's received, it's ready to go to the steering committee, or in what I imagine is the most unlikely scenario, that it's ready to go to the steering committee now? But please give some feedback in terms of where you think this is. As with the poll earlier from the charter group, this is not binding, it's just to get a sense from the group of where we are. Okay, great. So for those who have specific issues that they want to see or think need to be taken a look at again, please, my email will be up later on. Put it in the chat or send an email with what you think those are, and I'd be happy to work on them, go back to the policy group, etc. So moving on to the next document. This is the guidance for collaboration with industry that we're going to move to now. This is something, again, that's been a theme in terms of engaging with industry since the very first summit. We've had strong participation from members of industry and really do, through the discussions, have expressed a strong sense that this is something that would be good for the IHCC as a consortium to be able to partner, but we also want to make sure that we're very transparent, again, sticking with the values expressed in the charter about how these collaborations come together and what their aims are. So next slide. So here again, I'm going to use the same format to walk through this document as I did the last one. So beginning with what the purpose of the document is, as well as how the particular values of the IHCC are expressed in the document. And here, as I said, it really is just to provide some guidance for IHCC members as they pursue partnerships with members of the private sector through agreements between themselves and those organizations, how to promote the IHCC vision and the values through those agreements. As I alluded to, this is because of the wide variety of opportunities and options for how to put these kinds of partnerships together. This is written as a guidance document rather than a policy document. So it is intended to be a resource for IHCC members that they can use in developing their own agreements or the collective agreement that will come together around a specific collaborative activity, presumably a specific project that will go forward as an IHCC project. Next slide. Again, thinking about what's included, of course, first starting with the definition of what's applicable and what's not, talking about the different kinds of IHCC collaborations. In the discussion, it talks about 3 possible types of examples. That's not to say there might not be something different, but these were the ones that we thought about up front. Examples where resources might be provided by a partner from industry. There may be actual collaborative activity between IHCC members and industry partners, whether those industry partners are IHCC industry members under the charter who signed on to the IHCC Memorandum of Understanding, or if they're non-affiliated partners who still have something to offer and members are interested in coming together with them. They might also be examples where they are 2 different cohorts working together, where one of the cohorts happens to also be from the private sector, so it's an industry cohort, and then an academic or nonprofit cohort. So these are just different, again, illustrating the variety of ways these can come together, different ways that these combinations could happen. Again, here the document then goes on to talk about what the principles are around which collaborations and their agreements should be built. It does this by really talking about some points to consider in drafting the agreements, and then also offers some considerations for maintaining IHCC principles through the course of conducting the partnership as it goes forward as an IHCC project. Again, as an appendix, there is a checklist that's provided as a resource for members to use in developing their agreement. In contrast to the publication policy, it is not a template, it's not a form, it's just a checklist. Next slide. Something else that the policy includes, or the guidance document includes, is first principles for really any collaborative activity from IHCC, particularly here called out in the context of the industry collaborations. These principles come directly from the Reykjavik meeting and the breakout session that the policy group had, and they were presented to you all at the closeout session for that meeting. And they really are about why would any collaboration and a collaboration with industry be pursued, in particular here again for the purposes of this document. They, in brief form, are examples where there's a clear value to all participating parties in forming the collaboration, whether that's a unique scientific opportunity or access to resource or some other benefit sharing that might be in the interest of the IHCC member. In some cases, it could be important, and we want to make sure to amplify the opportunity for that, for capacity to be built for member cohorts through the activities of the partnership. And then also, as the final principle, making sure, again, going back to that IHCC value for fairness and equity, that there's the potential to include all cohort members in a given collaborative activity, again, based on the study design, but that they also have opportunity for leadership in putting together that proposed study design and the conduct of the work, as well as in the publication and authorship of any publications that result. Okay, so we're going to move back into discussion again here in a few minutes. This was the warning sign. So again, the points to consider for which agreements should cover different elements, again, break down according to the main values found within the Charter: fairness and equity, transparency, and again, we've called out timely and open dissemination of data and findings as an explicit value. Within each section, you can read within the guidance document the particular issues to be covered. Fairness and equity is really about making sure that responsibilities for all parties are clearly laid out. There's accountability for carrying out those responsibilities. The governance structure for the partnership is set forward at the beginning before work goes forward. With regard to transparency, this has to do with many different elements of the collaborative activity itself, beginning with posting publicly a summary of the collaborative agreement between the cohort members and the industry partners on the IHCC website so that the public can see it, including what the aims are and what's come together, disclosure of any potential or perceived conflicts of interest, what access is going to be provided either to data or to resources to the parties who are involved, and then, of course, again, going back to our timely dissemination, what's the timeline for any data release? Under specifically the timely and open dissemination of data and findings, this harkens back to the Charter with regard to its comments on intellectual property in terms of re-emphasizing that and making sure that there's freedom to operate through the agreement for IHCC members as called for within the Charter document. It also, again, goes back to making sure that there are milestones laid out within the agreement to make sure that the project moves forward and there's accountability for the project moving forward in a timely way. So for the two questions for discussion, the first one that they came up was really making sure that, again, not wanting to create work or create new standards specific to IHCC if we didn't need to for conflicts of interest, thinking that was an area that was well explored. What are appropriate standards? What's listed in the policy are those for the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. We just wanted to, again, provide an opportunity for people to provide other examples that they would like to see in there if they have them to offer. I think the bigger, more substantive question for you all has to do with the timelines for dissemination of data coming out of a collaborative project with industry. And this has to do with, again, trying to put an outer bound on what does it mean to provide timely access to data. And here the standard that the policy group has proposed is that data release coming out of one of these collaborations should happen no later than or no more than 12 months post quality control or post-data cleaning. This does, of course, intend to recognize the legitimate and reasonable interest that industry partners or others may have in a period of exclusivity in terms of access to the data before they are made public. But I'd really like to get some input from everyone on if this 1-year mark is the right timeline, right benchmark for IHCC.
We have a number of attendees who are obviously from industry and hopefully our partners or members already. It would be great to see some comments from them. Tomorrow we're going to have a panel discussion with a number of industry partners and participants. It would be great, though, to hear at this juncture whether this guidance is going in the right direction for you. David Glazer says 1 year sounds about right to him. Alan Schuldiner also has the same comment.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And if anyone else has more support for that or a different suggestion, please, again, go ahead and put it in the chat. And Hannah already mentioned she'll be capturing that, so we will see it. This is a question that I'm not going to spend very much time on. It's posed within the document. And again, if you have thoughts with regard to this issue, once I go through it, please let us know through the chat or through an email. But this was an issue when we were looking at other examples of guidance documents on collaborating with industry, as well as in discussions with the steering committee. There was strong support for a prohibition on partnering with organizations that had programs or products around tobacco or nicotine products. And so currently, there is a strong recommendation against partnering with such organizations, and we just wanted to ask whether or not the group felt that this should be more of a prohibition and so stronger, or if there were, in counter to that, are there any exceptions where there might be health-related applications for tobacco products, as an example that was posed to me. Also, should alcohol producers be similarly discouraged in this? Again, we won't spend time on this now, but please let us know your thoughts so we can reflect that going forward. Next slide. So I'm going to refer you to the document, but just wanted to have a chance to mention quickly the checklist and the issues that are included within the checklist. I think they're relatively straightforward. Just a reminder, again, this is meant to be a resource to IHCC members, and what is laid out or just basic information about the collaboration type, who's involved, who the points of contact are. Importantly, are there any regulatory issues, ethics issues, et cetera, invoked through the collaboration that need to be taken care of, indemnity issues, and then going back to those 3 points to consider, fairness and equity, transparency, timely and open data dissemination. There are some particular issues called out under each of those. Next slide. I believe is just the one opening it up to any other questions or issues that weren't touched on or that people wanted clarification on before we did another poll for where the group thought this document might be. So just while you all are taking the poll, I'm going to read a question that came in through the chat from David Glazer, asking about if the prohibitions on the tobacco and nicotine product organizations would apply to individual cohort collaborations or only to IHC-wide collaborations. And as written currently, it would apply to any collaborative agreement between an IHCC member and an industry partner. So it is pretty broad at the moment. So if that's something that there are concerns about, please do let us know. Question from Mary about revenue sharing or intellectual property. Within the guidance document, again, the treatment of that issue, we don't talk about revenue sharing at all in the document, but it is mentioned that the intellectual property should be laid out in such a way to be consistent with the charter so that there is freedom to operate for IHCC members, and that no one should be able to prevent through an IP claim IHCC members moving forward with their research. There's another question about clear guidelines on dissemination of full summary statistics for all publications in the data sharing section, and we will definitely get to that. Okay, again, for those who thought there were targeted changes that you wanted to see again, please let me know what those are, again, through chat or through email. And otherwise, it looks like, again, we need to make some changes based on the discussion, and we will go forward.
Laura, there's a question from Josh Denny or a comment.
Yes, I'm just reading it now. Thank you. Okay. And so, yes, again, the question from Josh was whether or not a cohort would be prohibited from accepting funding from a prohibited member for a specific effort and still be part of IHCC. The prohibition would only extend to IHCC collaborative agreements. So if there was a partnership outside of the IHCC, this would not apply. And then there's also a follow-up comment from David about giving up autonomy and decision-making. And again, I don't know if my answer to Josh's question gets at that in the sense that it only has to do with IHCC activities. Within the guidance document, if you read at the very beginning, there's also a short discussion on what the guidance does not cover, and it is noted there that it does not cover individual relationships or collaborations between IHCC members and an industry partner that have nothing to do with the IHCC. It does talk about disclosing those, but not details of them, just so that there's awareness and transparency. A question about the guidance checklist, that is Appendix 1 in the guidance document itself. I think it starts on page 7 of the document. David, if I'm still not answering your question, then I can try to do it via email to make sure that we're clear, because it is important.
So this
okay,
I was just going to clarify maybe my understanding of your answer, which is that cohorts remain autonomous to engage with any partners they wish on their own. But if an activity is a cohort, an IHCC activity, a cross-cohort, multi-cohort activity, it should be precluded from engaging with tobacco or potentially alcohol industry sponsors.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, Ida, can you show us, I guess we've already looked at where we were on this, so we can go on to the next and final document. And these are the core data sharing principles, which have already come up and are definitely at the heart of what IHCC intends to do, and also among the most complex issues that we have to work on, because we are talking about working across so many different cohorts, so many different national laws and regulations, and so many different cultures. And so it is quite thorny and complex, but incredibly important. Okay, so again, this document is different still from the other two, and the purpose of it is not to establish a data sharing policy, because quite frankly, we don't have all of the details that we need from the cohorts about their own policies and what they are able to share in terms of metadata versus summary statistics versus individual level data. And so what the goal here is to try to get to a basic common statement and understanding about what data sharing expectations are fundamental to achieve the IHCC vision in order to go forward. And those basic expectations will then be combined with input from the individual cohorts, which we sought a few weeks ago through a policy questionnaire that Eric Plummer sent out, and that is linked to within this data sharing principles document. So if you haven't yet had a chance to fill it out, please take a look at it perhaps over the next 1 to 2 days while you're thinking about it. And again, you don't necessarily have to fill it out. Please feel free to forward it to the right person in your cohort who can answer it quickly. We've designed it as straightforwardly as we can, and we hope it won't take that long to complete. But it really is important for us to get a sense of exactly what individual cohort policies are and where the limits and opportunities are for data sharing. So this is conceived of as a pre-policy document. These are really just about the fundamental principles. As I mentioned, what's laid out here are proposed core principles. Those principles are broken down into 2 categories. Foundational, which lays out the basic expectations needed today to start moving forward in our scientific collaborations and our scientific operations. And then also a few, quote, aspirational principles that would build upon the foundational principles, and where we know that it's important for the IHCC to try to move forward toward in order to fully achieve its vision, but where we just need more information and likely need time to be able to figure out how to navigate the challenges related to data sharing and international law, etc. The expectation, it's important to note here for these principles, is that they work together across the whole set of principles, and also that we will always make sure that the local concerns in terms of local policies and ethical norms, legal requirements, et cetera, are the prevailing factors in determining what's appropriate for data sharing for data from any cohorts. So again, why it's very important for us to hear from the cohorts going forward. And then quickly, if we just go ahead and move to the next slide, wanted to just let you know that, again, in an effort not to recreate solid work that's already been done by others, the policy group is proposing within here to adopt the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health framework for responsible sharing of genomic and health data as its, quote, ethical foundation. I'm not going to go through this in great depth. I hope many of you are already familiar with it, but this framework is really about what are the foundational principles for responsibly sharing genomic and health data, and then how can you use those principles to guide the application of specific core elements in your particular program. This assumes that appropriate consent is in place, again, relative to the local ethical norms and ethics oversight. And the intent is to promote individuals' rights to participate in research. Yes, the question here to get to, and again, this is something we can take through the chat or through the email rather than taking time at this point, is whether or not there are other international frameworks or standards that the policy group should consider in developing future data sharing policies. Or if there are any concerns about where we might need to supplement or caveat any of the principles or elements within the GA4GH framework. Okay, so looking at the foundational principles, again, as I mentioned, these are intended, in particular, these first 5 to be taken as a whole. And so there are interdependencies between them in terms of cohort comfort for being able to accept that any one might be true, because they might also need to know that another principle is also in place. And so they should be considered en masse. They're relatively straightforward and common with regard to genomic data sharing these days. And so I really wanted to then ask the group with the next slide in terms of the question if these are the right core foundational principles. So then we can move down to the next slide and a more granular question within this, again, going back to the desire to set a more specific implementation plan and outer band on what timely data access means, and here also have reflected the 12-month benchmark for making sure that IHCC-generated findings are accessible beyond IHCC, so out to the broader scientific community. And there was general agreement with that benchmark before, so unless I see otherwise in the chat, we will assume that that is still a reasonable benchmark for this going forward. So now just to consider the aspirational principles, and these are about where should the IHCC members try to be reaching to get to promote that fundamental data sharing, which is so central to what the IHCC hopes to be able to achieve. I won't walk through each of these, but hope that you can take a look quickly at the bolded information and see that really what these are working on is trying to optimize data access processes, as well as maximize access to the underlying data, as well as IHCC-generated data for the broader scientific community going forward. And again, this is where it's going to be really important to understand what cohort policies are and to take the time to work through the tricky issues involved with seeing what can be done based on a given situation to streamline data access for IHCC project collaborators, as an example. We acknowledge that from what we do know already, we expect that might not be readily feasible in the next few months, but we'd like to work towards that, or the policy group is proposing that as a goal to go forward to that. Looking at the questions, quickly accessible beyond IHCC does mean to the broader scientific community. And I also wanted to go back to Peter's comment earlier as we're thinking about these principles and as we're thinking about what we're going to do with them, we are very much expecting that, particularly for the short term, and that would be a year or two, as we work through these complex data sharing issues, that each IHCC project would define the data sharing policy for that project so that cohorts coming in to participate would understand the expectations and understand how they could meet those expectations before we try to get to a trans IHCC policy that might be universally applicable, because we just know there's a lot of work to be done and we don't want to hold it up because of trying to get to something that's perfect. Okay, the next, again, this is another discussion point. If people want to weigh in on these, I can see that there have been some comments coming in.
It was mainly around, from Kobus, around the notion that some LMIC cohorts may not have the resources to provide adequate data management that conforms to some of these policies. And I responded that the IHCC might potentially facilitate helping that those cohorts get access to, or in some cases even provide resources to facilitate more robust data management.
Okay, thank you. That's the answer that I would have provided as well. I think identifying what those needs are for cohorts in different areas is something that we hope to do, again, through the policy questionnaire that has been put out, as well as just as we go forward, starting to conduct these collaborative activities and identifying where the roadblocks pop up and what we need to address, and provide resources to help assist cohorts to work through them as we can. Please, again, I think just because of the time, if you have any other comments, please let us know, particularly what's missing. The concept of reciprocity, as an example, is not mentioned directly in here, and that may be something that the group thinks is entirely appropriate for the IHCC versus for an individual cohort or program, but it would be great to hear about that or anything else like that. Also, again, just keeping in mind that these are meant to be a pre-policy document and to form an input into developing data sharing policies, whether that is a policy that is for a specific IHCC project, or again, going forward, if we are able to make some broader statements about data sharing across the consortium. So there'll be many other chances to come back and look at how this plays out and look at how we flesh it out through guidance that may happen, or again, through specific project plans that are developed.
Laura, this is Jeff. I wanted to know, since we had a little compression here and we're over time, could you give maybe a timeline or a deadline that you would like to maybe receive some additional written comments from participants on any of the 3 policy or guidance documents that were discussed today?
So yes, we have been talking about, because we would like to move them forward where it's possible, but 2 weeks. So I guess that would be May 18th, or maybe going out to that Friday, and I can't do the addition in my head just now, but we'll send something out with a date that's about 2 weeks out for any written comments or follow-ups on the 3 documents. I knew this was going to be incredibly hard to get through, and apologize that it is as high level as it is, but I hope it will help you to digest the documents when you go back to them.
Great. So thank you again for your leadership and those of the policy working group, or committee, I should say, in getting us through some pretty thorny issues. Fortunately, we are not the first to wade into some of these territories, so it was great to be able to borrow from others. And I think you've crystallized everything extraordinarily well. As we saw, there are going to be some comments, and people should continue to contribute any comments they wish to make throughout the day or throughout the days in the chat. If you want to just put the word policy in front of it, just so we can highlight that for Laura and the team, that would be great. We are about 7 minutes behind schedule, which is not too bad. I'm going to suggest that we reconvene at 10 minutes after the hour, as opposed to 5 minutes after the hour, which was the original intent. So everybody take some time to stretch and come back at 10 after, where we'll start our session on COVID-19. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.